Hello, I'm Annabel Brodie-Smith, Communications Director of the Association of Investment Companies. Venture capital trusts, commonly known as VCTs, provide finance to some of the most dynamic small companies in the UK to help them grow. Though the companies that VCTs invest in start small and can be high risk, they can grow into household names, helping to create jobs and generate economic growth. As such, the government offers generous tax breaks to compensate for the risks involved. Uncertainty around Brexit has hit UK markets and raised questions about the UK's economic prospects. But what effect is it having on the UK's smaller and quoted companies? Despite last year being a tough year for investments, the average VCT returned 2.7% in 2018 and is up 42% and 163% over 5 and 10 years. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by 3 investment company managers: John Glencross from Calculus VCT, Ian McLennan, Point VCTs, and Rodney Appiah, Foresight VCTs. Right, on to the questions. Rodney, what are the benefits and risks of investing in VCTs?
I think there are a number of benefits to investing in VCTs. I think the first benefit and the most obvious one is the ability to have exposure to a diversified portfolio of companies, private companies within the UK. So if you're interested in entrepreneurship and supporting small and medium-sized enterprises, then investing in VCTs is a great way to get some exposure to that. I think the second benefit is that returns have been pretty good over the last 5 to 10 years. And I think obviously that the last benefit is the tax relief, which can be quite generous, particularly when you look at other examples. In terms of risks, I think there are a number of risks. Obviously, the most notable one is that investing in early stage businesses is a high risk endeavour. You don't always get your money back, and sometimes there'll be situations where you may get back less than money you've put in. So you've got to go into it with an open mind and full acknowledgement of that risk.
Right, thank you very much, Rodney. Ian, do you have anything to add on the risks and benefits of investing in VCTs?
I think Rodney's captured most of it, but I would add regulation as both being a benefit and a risk, actually. So the VCTs are quite well regulated. They're listed on the LSE. They have a proper governance structure with an independent board separate from the investment manager. There are rules about how concentrated the portfolios can become. I think rules like that are pretty positive for the investors. But on the risk side, also be aware that VCTs, in order to qualify for the tax breaks, have to comply with certain rules about what sort of companies they can invest in. So the size of the company, the age of the company, what sort of sectors it's in as well. So there might be some restrictions to what the investment manager can do.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point about the independent board of directors who are there to oversee the manager. And you, John, do you have any views on benefits and risks?
Well, I think in terms of the benefits, I mean, VCTs have been around now for 25 years. And I think they have come of age. It's at times been a slightly troubled growing up, but I think they are now a recognised asset class. They have competent managers. And I think the benefits of VCTs, of course the tax breaks are attractive, but if you invest with a VCT now, you actually are investing already into a diversified portfolio of some very interesting, exciting smaller companies. And of course, most of us in our other forms of saving will be exposed to larger companies or maybe property or whatever. It is now, I think, quite appropriate for people to think about having appropriate exposure to this class of smaller growing companies.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point you make about the history of VCT investing, that experience that's been built up. Right, well, going on to investments, where are you currently finding investment opportunities?
Well, I think we've always had investment opportunities from a number of sources. Because we've been around for 20 years, I mean, we get a lot that just comes in direct. And we monitor all the sources. And if you want me to mention a few companies.
If you could.
I mean, I think the interesting thing is that we are looking at companies that are capable of actually having business models which apply internationally, globally, and also often capable of making a difference in people's lives, but within a sensible, coherent business. If I take weeding tech, which is probably the world's best environmentally friendly alternative to chemical herbicides, selling in North America, selling in Asia, selling in Europe.
Ian, where are you finding investment opportunities?
So one example of that is health related. We've invested in a company called Skin Analytics, which is addressing a problem that both the NHS and private sector healthcare providers have with waiting lists to see dermatologists. So there are literally millions of people every year who are worried about skin moles and lesions. And there are only 700 dermatologists in the UK who can see them if their GP thinks that that's what's required. And because it is potentially cancer, it's one of the government's focuses in terms of targeting waiting lists, etc. So it's a real problem for the NHS trusts. And Skin Analytics has, using machine learning, has developed a software system which can diagnose cancerous melanoma from specially taken photographs. The photographs just require a special lens. They can be taken by a triage nurse, or they could be even taken by the patient themselves. And that will not only reduce waiting lists and allow healthcare providers, including the NHS, to meet their targets, but of course provides much faster answers and diagnoses for patients as well.
I'm very pleased to hear about these companies that are helping us to live longer, healthier lives.
Yeah.
Make sure that we actually continue to live.
Yeah, positive social impact
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah.
Rodney, where are you finding investment opportunities?
I mean, just to give one example, we engaged in a business based in Southampton called FreshRelevance, and they were turning over about £2 million. They developed a software platform to enable e-commerce marketeers to improve their conversion rates online, so to encourage you and I to buy more goods through personalisation and more targeted email. And we had a really interesting conversation with the management team about the possibilities for accelerating that growth by engaging with a partner like Foresight, and we were able to convince them that taking on some funding now rather than later was in their interests. And I'm pleased to say that post that investment, the business has grown quite comfortably. We've helped the business to establish an office in Boston, and they now have some individuals on the ground in the US actively selling the product.
Yeah, and I think you make a very good point about the fact that there are a wide range of companies all over the UK.
Absolutely.
Now, Ian, Brexit, it's hitting the headlines every day, I have to say. I have to ask you, what do you think the impact of Brexit will be on smaller unquoted companies?
Well, I've spoken to our portfolio companies, of course, specifically, and most of those are companies that are British companies. Typically, most of their sales are in the UK at this point of time. And asking them about it, their main concern actually is around people. So particularly for the tech-related companies, they tend to have a fairly high proportion of EU nationals on their payroll. And of course, part of the growth of any company is expanding the payroll, particularly in areas like marketing and technology. For example, one of our portfolio companies has said that they've already seen a 50% drop in applications for jobs from EU nationals just since the referendum vote, because of the uncertainty that's been created. So that's the main problem we're seeing operationally. I mean, longer term, there are mitigants to that. I'm sure that ultimately we'll have well-defined rules on what immigration from the EU looks like, who can and can't, and what the skill level thresholds are. I'm sure there will also be immigrants from outside the EU, and of course British people can be upskilled as well to fill the jobs. And finally, on the more positive side, obviously the healthcare related companies are hoping that they will continue to see some real increase in NHS spending in particular as a result of Brexit.
Yeah, I think that uncertainty is clearly having an impact. Rodney, Brexit, what are your views on its impact?
Yeah, that dreading word. So I would say that what's really surprised Foresight is the SME community has been surprisingly resilient in the face of Brexit, and in the face of the uncertainty, in the face of the paralysis of our government. They've just carried on creating jobs, carried on innovating, carried on growing. And that's been really, really encouraging. notwithstanding all of that, I think we have seen some changes sort of emanating through our portfolio. I think the first thing is that clearly the weaker currency has helped. A number of our businesses in our portfolio are export-led, and so actually that's been a net positive in many cases. I think in terms of negatives, we've had to be a little bit more cautious, particularly being mindful of the risk of increasing tariffs and the risk of clogging ports. And so in some cases, I take an example of a business that I'm involved in, a specialist manufacturing business in Kent. We've had to stockpile products to ensure that if in the event of a no-deal Brexit and some confusion or some disruption, that we can still continue to export goods to some of our international clients. And so we are taking steps to mitigate the risk, but clearly uncertainty is not helping.
No. John?
Well, I mean, Brexit obviously is a very important topic. If I look at the companies that generally we are invested in, and as I said, I mean, if you take the companies I mentioned, like Weeding Tech, which is environmental, Simpronics, healthcare, Essentia, they're actually all selling as much in the US and in the Far East as they are in Europe. And I think one thing that actually is true, it has never been that easy for small companies to sell in the EU. It's actually quite hard to get into France or Italy or wherever.
Is that because they're quite closed markets?
They're not easy markets to get into. There seem to be hurdles for smaller companies that presumably don't apply to the bigger companies or aren't such a challenge. Whereas you find that companies now, the generation of companies coming through will have products, services, business models which are global. And they will be selling in the US, they'll be selling in the Far East, they'll be selling in the Middle East. And I mean, we're seeing that. And actually, when I've spoken to our companies, Europe is, by and large, Europe is not that important a market for them. Where it hits is, I think, as was said, the uncertainty about employment status. Now, my expectation is that actually people, qualified staff who are here, will be fine. I think that's probably true. But actually, if you are one of those individuals, you're nervous, you're uncertain. And I think that is unhelpful at the moment. And I hope that we can sort that out fairly quickly.
Right. Looking forward, what is your outlook for the VCT sector, Rodney?
I think it's a really exciting time to be involved in the VCT sector. To John's point earlier, I think the market has matured. I think you're investing into established portfolios that are very, very well diversified across a number of different sectors. There's a lot of inflow of capital coming into the sector. And the startup community has never been more vibrant in spite of several economic headwinds, whether that's US-China trade or Brexit or a softening in the consumer market. That desire to sort of innovate and provide solutions to some of the world's challenges, that doesn't seem to be going away. So I think it's a really, really exciting time to be involved.
It's great to hear the British entrepreneurial spirit is strong and out there.
Absolutely.
Ian, what's your outlook in the sector?
Yes, we'd also be positive in terms of the quality of the opportunities that we're seeing. So as I mentioned earlier, we're particularly trying to engage with where the corporate sector are working with startups and SMEs to speed up their innovation. And there's a strong appetite there from the corporate sector to do that, which means that younger companies can get contracts and start to see revenues, and we can start to see that they have a market for their product that's worth investing in, particularly in areas like software as a service, machine learning, data. These are all some of the exciting areas that we're looking at, and I think with careful portfolio selection.
And John, what's your outlook?
I think if the areas that are particularly active at the moment, and there's some incredible, some incredible businesses emerging and getting traction in areas such as life sciences, healthcare, technology, which is a massive sector. I mean, there's so many subsectors in that. But also environmental services of growing importance, and the creative industries. So I think it's a very active time. It's a very entrepreneurial time. And as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing more female entrepreneurs coming forward. So I think it's One note of caution I might mention is it's very easy. It's quite possible to get startup capital in the UK now. I don't think any of us are actually at the startup stage, but then there is money available for what you might call growth capital. I think in the UK we still have a challenge to scale up. For some of these businesses to really achieve all they're capable of achieving, I think in the UK we have got to solve the scale-up issue or the scale-up challenge. I think the Treasury is well aware of it. There are moves, but I think there's more work to be done if we want to have an environment which is truly supportive of entrepreneurial companies.
Well, clearly VCTs are helping with that issue, but I have to say the one thing I find really encouraging is when I hear about the types of companies you're investing in, they're clearly economic benefits, they're creating jobs, but also there's environmental and social benefits, and I think that's something that hits home very hard and it makes it very interesting and sort of worthwhile as an investment. I'd like to thank our managers very much for joining us today. It's great to hear their views on VCTs and what the future holds. I'd like to emphasise that we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Investment is for the long term and you need to have a well-balanced portfolio. If you are in any doubt, you should talk to a financial advisor. Thanks so much for watching.